At my brother's housewarming, the room burst into laughter after his voice cut through the noise. "Not everyone can afford a two-bedroom apartment," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. My parents smiled proudly, their glasses raised. I felt their eyes shift toward me, the quiet sister, the one who never quite fit in. The laughter echoed, clinking against the wine glasses and the fake warmth in the air. I just sat there, pretending to sip my drink, keeping my face calm even when my pulse quickened. He wanted a reaction, a small crack in my composure. But I wasn't giving him that satisfaction. Then came the voice that sliced through the noise, calm, steady, and sharp. "Is that why you bought a 5-bedroom house, Carly?" The entire table froze. Forks hung midair. The music from the speakers suddenly felt too loud. And for the first time in years, my brother had nothing to say. "Hi, I'm Carly Moore," and that moment changed everything. You see, in my family, I've always been the quiet one, the one they underestimated, the one who didn't follow the family's path. While my brother chased attention and applause, I built something different. Something they never thought I could. That night wasn't just a family dinner. It was a reckoning, a moment, years in the making. And it all started long before that dinner table went silent. If you've ever been laughed at by your own family, stay with me, because this story isn't about revenge. It's about proving that silence can be louder than any applause. Before Denver shaped my edges, childhood set the rules. My older brother, Jason Moore, learned early how to fill a room: jokes, noise, easy charm. I learned to read rooms instead, where to stand, when to leave, which words might cost me a week of cold glances. My mother, Brenda, prized visibility. She liked neighbors who waved, teachers who praised, proof that her family looked polished from the curb. When Jason won something, she framed it. When I finished something, she filed it. Love wasn't absent, just audited. My father, Alan, kept score by silence. He fixed outlets, bled radiators, returned to the couch like a man coming off a ship. If he agreed with my mother, he didn't say. If he disagreed, he didn't either. Sometimes he'd hand me a set of hex keys or a spare tape measure, approval as tools instead of talk. At school, I drifted to drafting rooms and studio hours. Scale models felt honest. What you measured became what you built. I kept part-time shifts in a campus woodshop, learning grain and torque. Holidays became repetitions of performance. Jason recapped wins while side conversations stacked up behind him like applause. I learned logistics. Where the coats went, how many chairs to pull, how to disappear behind a sink of dishes without being accused of sulking. The trick was to be useful and forgettable at the same time. The first time I brought home a small design prize, Brenda wiped dust off the ribbon and asked where we could store it. Jason laughed, not unkindly, just confidently, as if victory were his dialect and I had borrowed a word. I smiled for photos no one printed. Years slipped forward. Internships paid in experience and black coffee. Rent ate the rest. I built a portfolio from favors and late nights. When I finally landed a client who valued quiet excellence over volume, my work widened. One renovation led to a referral, then another. I learned to price fairly, to say no without apology, to let good work advertise itself. The noise outside my world didn't stop, it just stopped deciding for me. I practiced a discipline my family didn't understand. Say nothing until a contract was signed, celebrate after invoices cleared, save before spending. Mornings I ran along Cherry Creek. Evenings I studied permits and learned how Denver breathes its alley setbacks, its winter light, its stubborn clay. Calls from home rarely asked about process, they measured outcomes. Brenda wanted milestones suitable for small talk. Jason wanted a rival he could see. I offered neither. Distance became insulation, not escape. The job that shifted everything came from an owner who'd seen a modest porch I'd turned into a room that met snow and sun in equal measure. He asked for a restoration with restraint. Keep the bones, add the future. I worked months without fanfare, tracing old studs with new intent. When the final check cleared, I moved numbers from someday to soon. I toured neighborhoods alone, counting trees, measuring noise, testing morning routes to the hardware store. The house I chose didn't brag, it waited. 5 bedrooms, not for trophies but for possibilities. A studio, a library, a guest room that said yes without apology. Keys felt heavier than I expected, like a promise you carry with 2 hands. I didn't send a photo. I brewed coffee on a folding table, rolled paint under early light, and let the walls forget the last voice they heard. When Aunt Teresa stopped by, she took in the crown molding with a smile that didn't need words, then hugged me as if the house were a decision about myself, not a purchase. I believed her. By the time summer thinned the evening air, the story had begun to write itself without witnesses. Progress has a rhythm you don't notice until silence reminds you of it. Days folded into weeks of drafting lines that became houses, rooms that became stories. My phone stopped buzzing with family updates, and the quiet turned from punishment to peace. Clients came from word-of-mouth engineers, small firms, couples who wanted homes that felt like breathing spaces instead of showcases. That's how I met Noah Parker, a structural engineer with a calm voice and eyes that measured before they judged. We met on a renovation project where deadlines were heavier than the walls we were fixing. He didn't fill pauses, he respected them. When others bragged, he listened. It felt new to be understood without explanation. I kept my success modest. The habit of not boasting was hard to break. Even when my projects started getting published in local magazines, I tucked the articles into drawers instead of showing them off. What mattered to me wasn't the applause, it was the independence stitched into every blueprint I signed. By spring, I had enough savings to move from the rented studio apartment downtown. I didn't want luxury, I wanted permanence. I'd learned to read buildings the way some people read faces. Cracks, patience, potential. The listing came through a friend, a quiet 5-bedroom house on the west edge of Denver, near the foothills. It had wide windows, an uneven porch, and a backyard that tilted slightly toward the mountains. It wasn't perfect, which made it perfect for me. The seller left early, keys on the counter. The first time I stepped inside, I felt like I was walking into an echo of who I'd been trying to become. The air smelled faintly of pine and dust, the kind that promises transformation. I signed the papers the next day, packed my drafting tools, and moved with only 3 boxes, 2 lamps, and a heart that finally believed it deserved space. The work of turning the house into a home felt sacred. I repainted the walls pale ash, replaced cracked tiles, planted herbs along the kitchen window. The master bedroom became my calm place, gray walls, blackout curtains, one framed blueprint that reminded me where I came from. Another room turned into a studio with double monitors and rolls of tracing paper stacked like soft columns. I left one room empty on purpose. Not everything had to be defined. Noah stopped by on weekends, helping me carry lumber, install shelves, or drink coffee on the back steps while the sky turned honey-colored. He never offered advice I didn't ask for. He just made the silence feel shared. When the final piece of furniture found its corner, Aunt Teresa visited. She brought pie and a folded dish towel embroidered with her own handwriting, "Build something that holds you." I showed her each room, the studio, the reading nook, the small deck I'd designed myself. She smiled at every turn, pride softening her eyes. "You've done well, Carly," she said, pressing her palm against the kitchen counter as if testing its strength. I nodded, unsure how to thank her for being the only one who saw me before the proof existed. Over coffee, she asked if I'd told my parents. "No," I said. "Not yet." "Wise," she replied. "People who never asked about your journey don't deserve to narrate your arrival." We laughed quietly, the kind of laughter that cleanses rather than stings. That night, as the city lights flickered below the ridge, I stood by the window and realized the noise I'd escaped had been replaced by something softer: ownership, peace, and the rare feeling of enough. When the first snow fell, I didn't think of proving anything. I thought of warmth, of walls that held instead of judged. And somewhere in that stillness, life finally began to unfold without permission. By the end of summer, my house had grown into silence that felt earned. The kind that doesn't ask for attention but offers calm in return. Work flowed easily, and my days began to carry a pattern of peace I hadn't known before. Then, one evening, the phone rang, a sound too familiar, too unexpected. The name on the screen stopped me. Jason. The pause before I answered was longer than it should have been. His voice came through, smooth, practiced, full of the same confidence I'd grown up around. He spoke about his new apartment downtown, a 2-bedroom, apparently a real upgrade. I could almost see his grin through the line. The invitation followed naturally: a housewarming party this weekend, the entire family coming. He said it lightly, but something in his tone carried more than an invitation. It was performance disguised as reunion. When the call ended, the house felt different. The quiet that once comforted me now pressed against my chest, heavy and waiting. Later that night, Aunt Teresa stopped by after closing her bookstore. She noticed the untouched cup of tea on my counter, the phone turned screen down beside it. Her questions were soft, the kind that don't demand answers. I told her about Jason's party, the casual pride in his voice, the familiar tug between anger and indifference that followed. She listened quietly, her eyes patient, then gave a small nod that said she already knew what kind of invitation it really was. She didn't tell me what to do. She didn't have to. Her silence meant, "You'll decide when the moment finds you." After she left, I cleaned the kitchen twice, wiped surfaces already spotless, as if control could substitute for clarity. The next morning, I met Ivy Collins for coffee downtown. The air smelled of roasted beans and late summer rain. Ivy had a way of reading me without effort. She never asked too many questions. She noticed the stiffness in my shoulders and simply tilted her head in unspoken, "What happened?" I told her about the call, about the invitation that felt like a test I hadn't agreed to take. Ivy listened the way she always did, quiet but present, like still water that makes you hear yourself. Her advice didn't need words. It lived in the slight lift of her brow, the way she looked directly at me as if to remind me that I was already standing on the ground I'd built. That evening, I sat by the window as the sun slipped behind the ridge. The thought of that party lingered. I imagined the laughter, the shallow congratulations, the familiar pattern of comparison dressed as conversation. I imagined their surprise if I walked in, not as the quiet one, but as the woman who had built something no one thought she could. I didn't want revenge. I wanted composure. By the next day, the decision had made itself. I chose what to wear, nothing dramatic, just simple lines and quiet confidence. I found a gift that matched the tone I wanted to carry. An espresso machine, practical but refined. Not expensive enough to brag, not plain enough to ignore. The drive into downtown Denver felt slower than usual. The city hummed with weekend energy, bright and indifferent. The bag sat beside me on the passenger seat, a quiet witness to the moment ahead. At a red light, I caught my reflection in the mirror, steady, expressionless, but not cold. I realized I wasn't nervous. I was done being small. Whatever waited inside that apartment, I would meet it the same way I built everything else in my life, one calm line at a time. The elevator opened onto polished floors and laughter that didn't belong to me. I carried the gift bag close to my side, as if it might shield me from the noise. Jason's apartment was easy to find, the door left open, the kind of invitation that assumes everyone wants to come in. Inside, the room was bright, crowded, and loud. Conversations stacked on top of one another, glasses clinked, cameras flashed. Jason stood near the kitchen island, taller somehow, glowing under the admiration of people who never looked twice at anyone else. He noticed me almost immediately, surprise flickered, then performance took over. My parents were there too. My mother's laughter was practiced, my father's silence the same familiar wall. For a second, I wanted to turn around and leave, but leaving would have meant surrender. So I smiled, polite but untouchable, and placed the gift on the counter. Jason's voice filled the air, introducing everyone to everyone else, his favorite trick. Then he motioned toward a woman beside him, Brooke Sanders, his fiancée. Her beauty was delicate, deliberate, the kind that glows under attention. She offered a handshake with the confidence of someone who had never been ignored. I returned it with steady calm, watching how Jason's hand lingered on her back, his new prop for admiration. Dinner unfolded like a performance. The table was long, the seats arranged for hierarchy. I was somewhere in the middle, between relatives who whispered names I hadn't heard in years. My mother's eyes skimmed over me like punctuation noticed, then dismissed. Jason made a toast. His words were polished, rehearsed, the kind of gratitude that circles back to itself. He spoke of success, of family, of earning your place in the world. Glasses lifted. He waited for the quiet that comes before a punchline. And then he found it. "You know," he said lightly, "not everyone can afford a 2-bedroom apartment downtown." The laughter was instant, a ripple across the table. My mother smiled. My father exhaled through his nose, something like agreement. The air thickened around me, but I didn't move. Years of practice had made stillness my shield. I felt Aunt Teresa's gaze before I looked at her. Calm, certain, unimpressed by theatrics. When she spoke, her voice didn't rise, it simply cut through. "Is that why you bought a 5-bedroom house, Carly?" The words landed clean, quiet, final. For a heartbeat, no one moved. The sound drained from the room as if someone had closed a door. Jason's smile faltered. My mother blinked. My father froze halfway through a sip. Someone's fork touched a plate and stayed there. Aunt Teresa continued eating, unbothered, while I reached for my water glass. My hands didn't shake. I didn't confirm, didn't deny. The truth didn't need my voice. It already filled the silence. Brooke's expression shifted, curiosity replacing politeness. Jason's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Around the table, relatives began whispering again, only now the tone had changed. Admiration diluted the gossip. Envy replaced condescension. I kept my eyes on the tablecloth, tracing its patterns, feeling the strange weight of vindication settle in my chest. It wasn't satisfaction exactly, more like closure arriving unannounced. When dinner ended, people lingered too long, trying to catch my eye, their voices softening into apology, disguised as admiration. I smiled once, faintly, and gathered my bag. Aunt Teresa rose, followed me to the door. Outside, the hallway air felt cold and pure. I breathed it in slowly, the kind of breath that belongs to someone who has stopped needing approval. They contacted me before the week was over. Calls stacked on my screen. I let them expire until the house returned to stillness. By the weekend, a car settled at the curb. My mother stepped out first. My father followed. Jason closed the doors with ceremony. I stood on the porch and waited, hands at my sides, offering neither smile nor apology. Inside, the air held new paint and coffee. I kept them to the front rooms. Boundaries are easier when walls cooperate. My mother looked everywhere but at me. My father tested a chair with his palm. Jason praised the windows, generous, efficient. They took the table. I stayed standing. The distance felt measured, a line drawn with a contractor's pencil. Jason began with charm, the kind that asks for something before it names the request. He talked about growth, momentum, how the family business was at an exciting point. My mother nodded like a metronome. The ask arrived dressed in optimism, expansion, a new lease, bay lifts, signage, a modernization plan. Investors were lining up, and family should be first. He admired my judgment, respected my discretion, valued my leadership words that meant money. I listened without interrupting. Being misunderstood had taught me to learn more by letting a pitch spend itself. Under the table, my hands were steady. Inside my chest, the old reflex to justify stirred, then went back to sleep. I said no. No conditions, no softening. I didn't hide behind timing or rates. I told Jason I don't invest where respect is conditional. The room adjusted to the sentence like a boat meeting a wake. My mother blinked, then gathered herself. She spoke of unity, opportunities that don't return, what people might say. She asked whether pride was speaking for me. I remembered when pride was a luxury. I remembered ribbons dusted and stored, dinners where silence preserved peace for others. I told her my peace wasn't negotiable. Jason's smile thinned. He switched from charm to pressure. Obligations, history, success that should circulate. He recited favors he believed he'd done, introductions he might make, doors that open when a family pushes together. I watched from a distance, as if it were happening in another room. My father finally spoke. A small contribution would show support. He glanced at my mother as if the sentence had been pre-approved. I set my palm on the table flat, steady, and said I would not be contributing in any amount. The temperature changed. Admiration soured into offense. My mother's voice cooled. She suggested I'd forgotten where I came from, that the house had gone to my head. She chose words like ingratitude and image. Jason stared toward the doorway, waiting for rescue. I didn't defend myself. Defense is a story told to the wrong crowd. I said this is my home. I choose who enters and for what reason. Then I opened the front door. They didn't move at first. Expectation is heavy. My father rose when he saw there would be no second invitation. Jason stood last. On the porch, my mother said I would regret closing a door on family. I said nothing. Some doors close because they were never doors, only openings you were told to be grateful for. Their car reversed down the drive. The house resumed itself. I brewed coffee and watched steam lift. The quiet didn't celebrate, it simply returned. Near dusk, Aunt Teresa called to ask if I needed anything. I told her I was fine. She didn't ask for details. We spoke about a bent shipment at the bookstore and the old dog by the register. After we hung up, I stood at the window and thought about the difference between doors and thresholds, and how some thresholds only matter once you decide you won't cross back. Night gathered at the edges of the yard. The house breathed. I let it. Autumn came early that year. The mornings grew thinner, sharper, like the air itself was shedding what no longer belonged. I hadn't heard from my family since the day they left my porch. At first I expected anger to linger, but silence arrived instead, as complete and final as snowfall. Life, I learned, doesn't pause for reconciliation. It simply continues for those willing to move forward. A few months later, the consequences began to reach me in whispers. Jason's business expansion never materialized. The investors he'd mentioned withdrew after a deal collapsed. A client sued for breach of contract. Equipment leases defaulted. Eventually, his modernization plan folded into debt. The apartment he'd shown off so proudly went on the market before winter. I didn't celebrate. There's no satisfaction in watching pride unravel, only recognition of truth finally catching up. My parents reached out through a single letter, unsigned but familiar in tone. They wrote about Jason's struggle, their disappointment, how family should stay united during hard times. There was no apology, only suggestion, a request wrapped in nostalgia. I read it once and placed it in a drawer I never opened again. By then, my days had built a rhythm too grounded to be disturbed. Work thrived quietly. I volunteered at a community center downtown, helping single mothers with housing paperwork, women whose stories reminded me how fragile independence can feel until it's tested. Aunt Teresa remained my constant. She dropped by with grocery bags she insisted were extras, though I knew she planned them. We spent evenings on the porch, her with her crossword, me with my laptop. Sometimes we spoke, sometimes not. Silence between kind people, I've learned, feels different at heels. In January, Ivy visited from the city. She brought news that Jason had taken a teaching job at a local trade school, steady work, far from the spotlight he used to chase. I felt something close to relief. Maybe humility would serve him better than applause ever did. When Ivy left, she hugged me tightly, the kind of embrace that doesn't need words. I stood by the window after she drove away, watching snow dust the trees that lined the road. The house felt neither big nor empty, it simply fit. Sometimes I think about that dinner table, about the moment silence became my ally instead of my cage. People often mistake quiet for weakness. But quiet has its own gravity, it holds truth steady until those who dismissed it can no longer look away. I didn't cut my family out of hatred. I did it out of necessity. Boundaries are not revenge, they are respect for yourself, for the life you fought to build when no one believed you could. There's a peace that comes with letting the past lose its claim. It doesn't arrive all at once. It grows, like sunlight through blinds, soft, consistent, inevitable. Now, on weekends, I drive north toward the foothills, park by the trailhead, and hike until the city disappears behind me. There, where the wind moves unbothered, I think about everything that led here, the laughter, the humiliation, the silence that followed. None of it wasted, just repurposed into strength. When I return home, the porch light greets me before I reach the steps. Inside, the air smells faintly of cedar and coffee. I pause by the window, watching my reflection settle into stillness. This, I realize, is what healing looks like when it's earned, not loud, not cinematic, but steady and true. To anyone still listening, thank you for staying until the end of my story. If you've ever been dismissed, underestimated, or told that your worth depends on someone else's approval, remember this. Peace built from self-respect lasts longer than validation built from noise. Tell me what you think. Tell me if you've ever chosen silence over chaos and found freedom in it. Your stories matter too.